We look forward to seeing you live, but we will be posting the recorded sessions on our NEDA Know How webpage, so you can find them there. As always, members registering with their NEDA email address will receive 0.25 education credits through USDF University. You do not need to do anything. We're submitting lists of NEDA participants to USDF who will register the credits for you. So to launch off our series tonight, we're really pleased to welcome back Steve Kraus with the Cornell University Farrier School. Steve Kraus is an American Farriers Association certified Journeyman Farrier who since 2010 has been Head of Farrier Services and a senior lecturer of large animal surgery at Cornell University College of Veterinary Medicine and the instructor of the Farrier School there. Prior to that, he had over 40 years in his own farrier business in central New York, showing many breeds of horses participating in diverse disciplines. In his career, he has shod horses used for dressage, jumping, endurance, racing, polo, three-day eventing, driving, flat and harness racing, and draft horses. He is known for troubleshooting lame, injured, and underperforming horses. You will remember Steve from his previous presentations on the proper geometry for shoeing the front and hind end of the horse. Steve returns for his third session with us to discuss the width protocol, an objective guide to determining the criteria needed to decide if a horse needs to be shod or go barefoot. His presentations are incredibly thorough, and your questions always make the sessions even richer. So please submit your questions via the chat option. And without further ado, Steve, I'll pass it over to you.
And you're just muted, Steve.
How's that now?
Perfect.
Can everybody hear me? Okay. As always, technology is a little bit unnerving to get going. I'm glad to hear everybody's doing okay. We've had kind of a different year, and it's great to keep the enthusiasm up, and hopefully we'll get through all these problems with COVID, and looking forward to another good summer. And so, the width protocol is an objective way to determine hoof care. And over the years, I've been involved with many farrier, horse owner type issues. And the problem that I think we have with a lot of hoof care situations is that there's kind of a lack of understanding what things really mean. And so I want to talk about what's going on with different things as far as whether we should shoe horses or not shoe horses. This tends to be a controversial issue, and it shouldn't be. We have to think more about the horse than any ideologies that happen, and this becomes in some cases emotional, and it doesn't need to be that way. We're going to talk about try and be an objective on how we approach these issues. And I'm not here to say one methodology is good for all horses or one methodology is bad for all horses, but there's a tendency for that to happen. And being in the focus of this type of situation, whether I'm been at Cornell here, we have people with bringing in horses that are sore and lame, claim to be riding with boots, and they either have not been trimmed properly or they have their feet worn away, and they insist that they don't want shoes when I know some type of shoe could help the horse. In this slide right here, and I pulled this foot on the right off a popular barefoot website, and this is a very standard way, if you can see my cursor arrow, of the way a lot of these feet are trimmed. And they want to promote keeping the feet in good condition. They roll and bevel the edges, which is a way to keep barefoot horses properly. Whoops, somehow my computer is not paying attention. Are to keep them from breaking away. But what I notice on this foot, sorry, I don't know why my computer is doing this. Sometimes when I notice on this foot, if you follow this line here, this foot is not balanced from front to rear properly. And that's why you have this bulging line up here. And I see this on a lot of these stylized barefoot horses. The other thing I see, and again, a lot of the photos are off the, this photo is off a popular barefoot website. Here where the point of the heel is, this heel is very underrun. So they're very concerned about keeping this foot tidy, but they're not concerned about the mechanics overall of the foot and the function. And if you remember my golden ratio stuff, this foot is got a reverse golden ratio. If we look at this foot on the left, this horse is highly accessorized to be safe, being ridden in the snow and the ice, got studs on, no snow pad. And, you know, there's a purpose to that shoe for this horse. And so the shoes are a benefit to this horse. Here's just a picture of my shoes. And I always tell people when they're not thinking about if shoes are good or shoes are bad for horses, you know, we wear shoes for specific reasons. And it would be nice to be barefoot on a sandy beach all the time. But if we're going to work horses, and sometimes the footing isn't as favorable, or we're asking them to do certain types of work, the shoes are going to help the horse perform and stay sound. One of the things that I have been involved with earlier in my life, I was involved with martial arts, and this is the yin yang symbol. And what it says here is that no matter how good something is, there could be something bad about it. And no matter how bad something is, there could be something good about it. So it's good to keep an open mind on a lot of things. So let's go over the reasons why we shoe horses. The main reason, and that people think about, and quite often is the only reason, is for hoof protection. We put a piece of metal on the end of the foot to keep it from wearing away. That's nothing new. It's been going on for a couple thousand years. But what they don't realize, and this picture shows a little bit of that, is we put shoes on that have, sometimes we have some of the horseshoe is where the leg isn't, but needs to be. So we're offering support to help the load that's above. Certainly, we put shoes on for traction, and that could be for all different types of work. Whether it be traction to not slip on the streets, or traction to not have an accident on the cross country or hunt field, or whether it's the proper traction to gallop on the polo field. But traction equals safety. And certainly horseshoes can enhance the gait of a lot of horses. So we do things with the horseshoes to maintain trim and to give the horse the ability to move in specific ways to make the gait either be smoother, or we correct the gait when if a horse has some limb deviations. The shoes are there, put on in specific ways, and the shoes are tailored to help the horse move properly, in some cases to stop the horse from interfering or hitting himself. And certainly we have injuries that horses do to themselves, and horseshoes are vital to heal injuries or deal with acute laminitis cases and puncture wounds and so on. And with young foals, we can use shoes to correct limb deviations so we can have straight legs further on into life. And certainly a lot of the shoes are what we call a therapeutic modality to help horses heal better. So here's a picture of a foot that was in, quite distress. And yes, you can try and wrap this foot up to protect it, but the frog support I have on here And the treatment plate that I have is a much better way to manage this injury this horse had. So why did we start doing shoeing in the first place? On the right, on the bottom of the screen, this is an unearthed early shoe, very crude looking, but this hasn't changed in a couple thousand years. And if you think about it, the success of an invention is how it has stayed with us over time. The wheel is quite successful and is about 3,500 years old. Yes, we have changed it a little bit. We have ball bearings, we have rubber wheels, inflatable wheels, and so on. But the concept of the wheel has not changed over 3,500 years. And horseshoes really have not changed over 2,000 years very much. They have been refined. We understand more how to use them. But that is the definition of success of any invention. And early on, the military really found an advantage over unshod opponents. And one of the biggest illustrations of that in fairly modern times is the Civil War, where it was a lot of documentation on the need for horseshoes in the South, who had no manufacturing capabilities. And the North was at a definite advantage by being able to manufacture horseshoes. And you can move machinery and cannons and soldiers much better on shod horses in hard terrain. But the Romans and the Celts really are the birth of using metal for horses' feet, because again, they tried to conquer a large part of their world, and some of the terrain was very rough, and they found that the horses can do better and go further. And so they are credited with early nailed-on metal shoes. But on the other part of the world, Genghis Khan conquered that part of the world on those Mongolian horses with no shoes. So how can you say one had to have it and the other one didn't? Well, those Mongolian horses had very tough feet. They were small, and the terrain was more of those prairie type terrain, or the steppes, and the horses did okay without any shoes. But history shows us that William the Conqueror traveled with regiments of shoeing smiths to keep the horses going. Napoleon also had large amounts of farriers working for him, and occasionally we use what we call a reverse shoe, and Napoleon is credited with the reverse shoe. We use it more for laminitis problems and so on, so the shoe is put on backwards. But legend says Napoleon shod a whole regiment of horses with shoes on backwards, so the enemy thought they were going in the other direction. I wasn't there, so I don't know it's true. But the Civil War certainly ramped up horseshoe production and the use of horseshoes in the United States. And so that's where really modern day horseshoe manufacturing stemmed from. And as the growth of the cities with pavement and what they call the street horses, by the tens of thousands needed shoes. And it was documented that the early ASPCA was established to protect the street horses, not the dogs and cats. And some of the quotes out of the early ASPCA literature talks about it is inhumane to work horses in the streets without shoes. So you really need horsepower to do what they did. And so there are reasons not to shoe horses also. If the hooves are healthy without shoes, you may not need them. Why change something that nature has made well? If the horse is in lighter work or no work, then again, the horse can do well without the need for shoes. If the horse is in a forgiving environment that he's compatible to, the horse can also not really need shoes. Some horses are worked in beautiful arenas with artificial footing. They have good conformation. They move well and all that, and they're not hurting themselves. So that's what I call a forgiving environment. Good conformation, which we talked about last year, is another reason some horses don't need shoes. The better the conformation, the less support and mechanics a horse needs to do his work. So it's a good idea to breed good conformation and breed for healthy, good boned horses. If the horse is not in competitive work and meets a lot of his comfort requirements, again, horse doesn't need shoes. But often the reason why you shouldn't shoe the horse is there's a lack of a competent farrier available, or a bad experience with a farrier that has done some harm to the horse because of his lack of experience or knowledge. So that is another important reason that sometimes it's better, the horse is better without bad shoes than to put bad, horseshoes on that are not right for the horse. And certainly horses with superior genes probably are less likely to need horseshoes. But let's talk about what barefoot really means. And I've spent a lot of time talking with people who only do barefoot type management of feet. I've spent a lot of time on websites, and I like to be knowledgeable about something if I'm going to talk about it. And so I have found that there are many variations of barefoot hoof management or shoeless hoof management, and some are good and some are questionable. And many of them are in conflict with one another. So we get these systems that people develop that may work in their area of the country, and they believe it should be for all horses. There are no standards in any of this, so people can pretty much preach and do what they want. Some versions of barefoot hoof management means the horse is actually trimmed on a 3-week basis. No matter whether he needs trimming or not, it's like a subscription, and they keep the feet in a constant state. There is no extra growth that is allowed to happen, and your barefoot trimmer shows up every 3 weeks, and even if he runs the rasp around the foot to take some rough edges off, you get charged for a trim. Some idea of barefoot is never trimming at all. And the people who seem to be moved to do that also don't like to worm horses, don't like to do their teeth, there's no parasite management. They don't trim their pastures. They want to buy completely non-GMO feeds, non-processed feeds, and see, there's some of the most unhealthy horses that I've seen. And quite often people try and pull horseshoes and try to transition to being barefoot. And for some horses, it occasionally works. But I've been asked to look at a lot of horses where they've said, we pulled his shoes 2 years ago. He's been sore ever since when we work him. And when do you think he's going to transition? And I say, probably never. So the barefoot model that some people use is based on a faulty premise. The horses that were used for what they call the Mustang trim or the Mustang roll are feral horses that have developed in the Great Basin area of the country. And these horses have tried to survive under the standards, and the ones that needed any hoof care probably died and didn't pass that need along. So if they can't keep up with the herd, if they can't get to water, they can't find forage to eat, they're not going to pass those genes on. Most horses in this country are not shod. The US horse population is up or down from 9 million. We estimate the US farrier population is somewhere in the mid 30,000. So do the math, it's impossible for farriers to take care of all these horses. US professional trimmer population, we have no idea how many people are trimming out there. Horse owners that take care of their own horses, again, there's a lot of that going on to some degree, and we have no idea how many are doing that. But we do know from nail sales, horse nail, and that's the key thing, how many shoes are nailed on or how many nails are actually sold. We can extrapolate that, and we know that less than somewhere's around 20% of the horses are actually shod regularly in the United States out of 9 million. So the truth about horseshoeing is trimming is the basis for all proper shoeing. An incorrect trim equals incorrect shoeing, and there's no way around that. An inappropriate shoe counteracts good trimming. A poor fitting shoe causes problems. Proper shoes are beneficial, and denial of shoes causes suffering and underperformance for a lot of horses. So if it doesn't fit right, it shouldn't be nailed on. The shoe on the left is complete incompetence. It's not a good way to keep a horse done. And I'm sure the guy who installed this toilet and door was the same guy who shod this horse. The problem is not horseshoes. The problem is not nails going into horses' feet. The problem is not being barefoot. The problem is not farriers or horse trimmers. The problem is inadequate training of farriers and trimmers. There's no standards that are enforceable for any of them. There's misapplication of horseshoes. There's not shoeing horses that need shoes and not recognizing the differences. And there's a lot of horse owner ignorance on this subject, and a lot of poor selection of horses out there. And there's also what I call the acceptance of mediocrity. And what that means is that I've seen a lot of horses, for instance, in a dressage ring where you can see them up close, that do a very obedient, nice dressage test, but it lacks luster. And the horse is barefoot, the horse is in very favorable footing, but the horse really isn't moving that well. But because the horse isn't really lame and the horse is doing what he's supposed to do, everybody thinks that's okay. They have nothing to compare to. And so that person has accepted mediocrity in their horse. I've had a lot of horses that come to me in that category, and instantly after putting the proper shoes on, their dressage scores seem to go up, or other horses that have had problems don't have problems anymore. So even though the horse wasn't lame, the horse was usable, but they accepted mediocrity in their horse without shoes. And then until the horse really gets shod, they don't realize how much better the horse can be if it is shod correctly. And there's a lot of egos out there. I've had some run-ins with some of these false prophets. And it seems like the barefoot world attracts a lot of these people. And they spout out a lot of false information. They think they're reinventing something special when this is nothing new. And I try to be objective about this with them. And but I definitely am not going to back down. Horseshoes are helpful to horses, and there are some people who think I'm the devil because I do this. This is just one extreme barefoot hoof care website. I'll read this to you. I think this is illustrates it. Just remember, shoes don't make your horse's feet healthy, they make them dead. Not to mention the necrotic burden on the horse's liver, heart, and kidneys. Dead hooves are insensitive, so if you shoe them, they become numb first, and eventually, without circulation, the tissues beneath the horn, the corium, strangulates and dies. There are so many new boots out there that there is no excuse for nailing a piece of metal on one of the most vascular parts of this anatomy. This is full of falsehoods. This person can't not back up anything that they claim. And this is one example of many have I seen of the extreme type anti-horseshoe people. So this doesn't help. Here's a horse of my foot. This horse is 32 years old, shod all his life, and a pretty nice looking foot there. So I don't think the shoes hurt him any. So critical analysis for hoof care requires objectivity, knowledge of the subject, horsemanship, know what these horses are used for, what their health is, and so on, experience with the subject. And so I developed this thing called the WITH protocol to help work through all this. And so it's an acronym. W stands for work. And the question is, what kind of work does this horse do? That's a fair question. Intensity is how much power is transmitted to the ground. So that's I. D is duration. How far is this horse used? What is the training or competition schedule? How much has this horse actually worked? Terrain. What is the working surface like? Is this horse on synthetic surfaces? What are the changing weather conditions that affect things? And horse, what is the individual horse? Different breeds have different problems and different health problems, different types of feet. And so we have to really understand what the individual horse needs really are. So work, we can define like logging horses, road horses, horses who work in feedlots, and even cross-country horses. They need traction and protection. Standardbred racing horses, roadster horses also need protection and gait management. Dressage horses and show hunters and reining horses, they need support and flotation. So they need less traction and more of a shoe that keeps them on top of the working surface. And then Morgan horses, saddlebreds, and show Arabians, they need weight to perform. They need gait management so they move correctly. So different horses need different things. Traction equals safety for the horse and the rider. With 3-day event horses, we can drill holes and thread them and give them variable traction to use or not use as needed. Intensity, if we think of intensity as collection, speed, or power, a dressage horse on the lower left has high state of collection, is putting a lot of intensity down to the ring surface, just as these pulling horses are going very slow and have to put a lot of intense strain and muscle and interface with the ground. So that's intensity. And my favorite sport here, polo, is intense. So again, these horses are galloping, they're making contact. And if you are in grass polo fields, and if you try to stop like this, if you're barefoot, as the footprints show, you would slip and slide all over the place. So we need traction when we're doing intense things. Duration is a distance. Wear may exceed growth on a barefoot horse. What is your competition schedule? What is your training regimen? The Army actually used to do trials like this, and they found barefoot horses can't last very long on the roads. And they actually did these 30 miles a day, 6 days a week trials to develop different horseshoe designs that would hold up. Terrain, huge effect on things. Climate and geography all interact. The Weather Channel used to have this up. The weather changed history, and it also changes horses' feet. It's from year to year, from climate to climate. And I indicate the Hampson study. Brian, and you can look this up. Brian Hampson is a veterinarian researcher in Australia. And in Australia, there are 5 distinct different climate areas where there are feral horses, they call brumbies. And they captured large amounts of horses in these areas. And they found each climatic area had a different hoof model that evolved on these feral horses in Australia. So it's very interesting to see that how the weather had that much effect on how feet develop. So not all terrain is the same. Some horses work on pavement. Some horses work on nice grassy fields. The horse, different breeds of horses have different characteristics. Thoroughbreds, for instance, have light bones and thin-walled feet and are more likely to need shoes than some heavy-duty crossbred horses. Conformation, a mature faulty conformation quite often needs shoes to support the horse properly. Health or injury, pathology and injuries, you need shoes for rehabilitation. The horses do so much better with them. And the husbandry, poor horse care may cause the need for shoes. If the horses aren't trimmed properly or regularly, if the horses are not taken care of well, and their feet fall apart, then how are you going to use this horse? The breeds, as I said, thoroughbreds have thin walls and soles. They're more likely to need shoes and work. Whereas Arabians, and that's this foot on the bottom right, is a beautiful foot off an Arabian horse. And that horse probably does not need shoes unless they're doing distance riding. So, you know, that horse has a beautiful foot. And if more horses had a foot like that, we probably shoe less of them. Quarter horses, we have developed show horses versus ranch horses. A lot of the ranch horses out on the open ranges can be used barefoot because they're in a very forgiving environment. They're very tough horses. They have good feet, and unless it gets really, really dry, they do well barefoot. Whereas the show type quarter horse is usually a bigger horse with very thin walls, feet not big enough for him, and they go lame very easily without shoes. And your warm blood type horses, quite often they have so much muscling, as I talked about in the geometry lecture. They often need a lot of lateral support, especially on the hind end, because they have so much muscle mass. And again, when you do this barefoot, you're not helping these horses. So the conformation is very important to think about. Those shoes provide support. They manage ground reaction forces. This hind shoe on the left has that lateral support I've talked about that helps the horse engage his hind end better than he would have if he was barefoot. Certainly horses injure themselves. This particular horse kicked a gate, could barely stand on this foot with this glue-on frog support shoe. Immediately the horse was standing on that and getting off the other foot, which he'd been, having to support himself for a couple of days till they got into us. This horse had a penetration injury right through the point of his frog. You can see on the left radiograph here, there is, my cursor's right on it, where he's fractured his coffin bone. This horse could not walk. They had to drag him into the shop. And I put this heart bar shoe on real quick, and the horse actually walked out of the farrier shop like nothing was wrong with him. The polo coach was just amazed when this happened. But there is no excuse for poor hoof care, whether the horse is being trimmed or shod. This is a terrible thing to look at. These shoes are on way too long. They're incorrect for this horse. They were 2 sizes too small. There's way too much heel growth on this horse. There's no excuse for this. This kind of, when I see something like this, it turns my stomach. But shoes provide more than protection. We call mechanics, which is these rolled or rocker toes or square toes or roller motion shoes, and they help horses that have arthritic joints. And then if we need flotation, like a reining horse does, or some of the dressage horses to keep them on top of the surface, we use wider web and asymmetrical shoes so that the horse has support, especially for soft tissue injuries. And then support beyond the foot is the extended heels, putting metal where the foot needs support for incorrect conformation. And so here's an example of what we call a rocker toe or a square toe and trailer. The square toe and trailer helps the horse that's hitting himself at a high speed trot straighten that foot flight out. The rocker toe is what we call mechanics to help a horse that has arthritic joints and give him ability to not flex that joint while he's moving forward. Extended heels are helpful for horses that stand under themselves and need more support. They usually have what we call a negative plantar angle in back, and they cannot engage their hind end wells. And if you put the extended heels on them, they immediately start using themselves better. The wide lateral branch is there to give those horses that are base narrow more lateral support. So on the width protocol, I'm going to plug in a bunch of different horses. And I'll start with one of my own horses. This is an off-the-track thoroughbred. So her work is polo, speed, contact. We need traction for all that. Our intensity is galloping and hard stops. During the summer, she trains or plays 5 or 6 days a week. We're on slippery grass to hard fields, and she's a thoroughbred, thin-walled. She's kind of flat-footed, needs a little support. And so she definitely is not a candidate to do this barefoot. And, if you check all these different things, everything there says she needs shoes. I've done a lot of competitive driving horses. Their work is pulling loads, highly collected to go on these obstacle courses at speed. They train a lot of miles. They're on roads and variable, they go through water. Many very, very tough, good-footed horses. And even though they're good-footed horses, they still going to need shoes to do their job for the traction and the help and the amount of duration that they're doing. And so, you go through water, it's slippery. It's a misnomer that barefoot horses have more traction than shod horses. And the qualifier there is with shod horses, we can put studs, Boreum, drill techs, whereas barefoot can be slippery, and especially on ice. Dressage horses, your work is collection, impulsion, balance, high intensity, but you train daily, but you're on beautiful terrain. So, a good footed horse put together well may not need shoes just because the terrain is so favorable. And so you may be able to work barefoot on these nice artificial surfaces. But if you go back to a standard bred horse where their work is racing, high speed trotter pace, very intense, they many miles a day on very abrasive stone dust tracks, very tough horses. They have beautiful, beautiful feet. They are very well conditioned. They have good bones, but the track would wear their feet away and they need the gait management. When we have eventers, our work is jumping and dressage, collection, speed, galloping, daily training, often competing, very varied terrain. Groom rings for dressage is great, but what about the cross country? So we need traction for that. Your endurance racing horses, again, distance riding, many miles trotting. We want the horse to be able to move freely and do as few steps in the 50 or 100 miles as possible. If we understand how to shoe these horses, we can help them with shoes to have very, very good motion, better than they would be barefoot. But that's definitely, distance is extreme, terrain is variable. A lot of Arabians are used, so they're really good-footed horses. And a lot of people try and use boots instead of shoes on this. And some even try to do barefoot, but they quite often get eliminated if the horses get sore. Gaited horses speaks for themselves. In order to do these highly animated gaits, you cannot do that barefoot. Here are some backyard horses. Obviously, they don't need to be shod. Very low intensity, duration is intermittent. Maybe they're ridden, maybe they're not. So, not all horses need shoes, and certainly horses that are used intermittently can get away with boots. Here's unfortunate foot for an off the track thoroughbred, very fly intolerant. It was turned out in the pasture during the summer and, raced around and just wore her feet away. So this horse should have not been turned out in the first place, but look what happens to feet when they get worn down. And this is just a sad example. There are shoeless options. Hoof boots are a temporary solution to a permanent problem for some horses. We've had people that claim they boot their horses, but the horses are still sore in the boots. And quite often their feet are just worn down because they cannot wear the boots all the time. But there are shoeless competitions for horses. And so I always scratch my head and go, if the rules are so that the horses can't be shod, then you're saying that shoes provide an unfair advantage, which, okay. But so you're admitting that the horses need shoes to compete better. But there is shoeless standardbred racing. It's been very popular in Denmark, and they train the horses with shoes, but then they race them without shoes, and they claim they have some faster times. But I don't know if that happens for all horses. So when there's not enough sole depth, well, the horses can wear right down through, as you see here. And we see horses like this frequently that have been barefoot. Some of them have been ridden. Some of them haven't even been ridden. They've just been out in the pasture. So if we don't have enough sole depth, we have to have a better way to protect it than just boots. And so we can do that. We can put pads on with shoes, rim pads. We can glue shoes on. There are a lot of options to help these horses. I was involved with the equine drug testing study at Cornell. Was shoeing their horses, which are former donated race horses, started in 1983. We started with standardbred race horses to develop the equine drug testing protocols. And then we worked thoroughbreds in there. So the standardbreds were worked under racetrack conditions daily. They were shod just the way they were on the track. The thoroughbreds were galloped on a sand mile track that they put in. And again, blood and urine was taken out of these horses to develop these drug testing standards. So all the horses were shod while in training. At some point, the bioscientists there developed computer modeling, so it became not necessary to train the horses while they were putting these substances in there to get do the blood and urine work, and they just became a plain research herd for what we call drug administrations. And so I was asked to pull all the shoes off all these horses to save money, and they didn't need shoes because they weren't training. So it was interesting to me that we started trimming all these horses with a bunch of these different barefoot methods that I'd been studying. And I found no difference in the hooves, no matter what barefoot method I used, other than a standard trim that I've been doing most of my shoeing career. Some of these methods that are highly touted were supposed to make the feet better. I didn't see any difference no matter what method I used. All the standardbreds kept good feet on them. We did the same with the thoroughbreds. And no matter what I did, no matter what method I tried that was supposed to perform miracles, at least 1/3 of the thoroughbreds needed to have shoes to stay pasture sound. They weren't even be worked. These horses are looked at by independent animal care group at Cornell, and we cannot have lame and sore horses. So again, we kept shoes on these horses that had really weak feet. And then one thoroughbred mare, even though she was checked every 8 weeks, never needed any trimming. She was perfectly in harmony with her environment. So one horse out of 70 seemed to be okay with nothing done at all. Interesting. I also helped the American Farriers Journal do a study of the horses.
Can I ask for a second?
Yes.
If I could just interrupt for 1 second, we did get a question about that kind of management. So if you have horses who long-term are changing their job, you go ahead and you pull the shoes and you have time to kind of figure out what they need. What would be your recommendation around the horses who, you're inclined to kind of pull them when they have a couple months off or their environment changes for a couple months? What kind of time frame is that not worth it for?
Well, I would say, here's what happens. And I've shot a lot of horses that were people that had them and that they were not being used over the winter. And so, okay, we want to save some money. We want to, not have to, be involved as much and so on with this stuff. And so it's typical to be pulling shoes in November or in upstate New York and New England, and then have these horses barefoot over the winter. So here's what happens. On some years, we the ground is soft and everything is fine, and then it snows and the ground is very forgiving and the horses do really well, and we trim them at every 8 weeks or so during the winter, and the feet are beautiful, and in the springtime we have nice feet to shoe. Then some winters, if we get an open winter and we get frozen ground, these same horses are really sore really quickly. And of course, we're accused of trimming them too short. No, we really didn't trim them too short, but we took away their protection. And the ground is so rough and frozen, they're being careful. They don't want to run around on this stuff because it hurts. And they probably would even be a little bit careful, even if they did have shoes on, because some of this frozen mud is really tough. And the frozen mud, if it stays that way in an open winter, is quite abrasive. So if you come back to even trim these horses, then they have no foot because they've worn it away on the frozen mud, and then they get sore-footed. So, that's what I've seen happen from winter to winter when we have, one winter feet are great and the next winter they're terrible. But transitioning beyond that quite often. If the horse is going to do it, he's going to do it readily. Let's put it that way. The horse has a thick sole, a thick wall, and the horse's foot holds up well with just normal trimming. But a horse that is a thoroughbred, thin wall type, with thin walls, thin soled, is not going to transition very well. Let's put it that way. And then if you get into fly season, they're just going to beat their feet up. Does that
So the
make it?
alternative, the horses that are maybe transitioning from New England to Florida for the winter, which is a very forgiving
Right.
footing.
But now you've got moisture changes. And sometimes they're good and sometimes they're not. But yeah, I mean, I think the changes in moisture and ground conditions have a huge effect from year to year. And if you send horses down to Florida, and that if they're going to be showing, then they're usually not have a problem.
Okay, thank you very
Does
much.
that help? I just want to make sure that's understood.
Don't worry, if there's more questions, they will get me. Don't worry.
Okay, so this is, we're almost done here anyway. So this is an interesting study I took part in. These are the feral ponies down here at Assateague Island. And a researcher friend of mine was able to collect all the legs and hooves off the horses they found dead around there. And so they control this pretty well. And the American Farriers Journal had me help them produce this, and it's available through them. The study is pretty interesting. And so I have a few of the panels in here. This happens to be the feet off a 27-year-old mare, spent all her life down there. And even though she lived to be 27, look at the kind of feet she had. So it's obviously you don't need really good feet and good conformation to survive. But one of the things that they had me do is look at all the pathology and the joints and bones and make comments on that. So all the comments that are underneath all these pictures of the feet, they had somebody section these legs and take all these really great pictures. And I got, like a whole folder full of these. And you can see there's a lot of bone pathology. You can see a lot of contracted heels. And we went through these quite a lot. And every one of these horses, although they live to be, great mature horses, if you were to put them to work, they'd never hold up. So the lack of hoof care on these horses, and this is typical for a lot of wild or feral horses, they can survive in their environment. But if you were to put them to work a lot of times with these crooked legs, you have an amazing amount of bone pathology and joint pathology. Here's another one, 21-year-old stallion. And again, never trimmed in his life, never shod, of course. Beautiful, strong looking feet, nice, thick, heavy walls and all that. But just, being barefoot all his life didn't help this horse very much as far as, the bone structure and so on. So, and we have lots of them in that study. So my conclusions are work, breed, and climate have the most influence on the need for shoes. Most performance horses need shoes to be competitive. Individual needs vary a lot. Some horses doing some activities in some environments can go shoeless, and there's no one modality for all. And so that's what I want to get out there, is that you really need to be flexible and really observe your horse and observe what you have before you make any assumptions on what the horse should have. In my thinking, I also think about this book called The Art of War by Sun Tzu from 512 BC. And Sun Tzu makes some interesting observations. He wrote this book about how to do battle with horses on different terrains. And he makes the statement, know your enemy. So substitute horse. The horse is not your enemy, but you really have to know, your individuals, and then know your terrain. Where and how is this horse used? And don't put your horses on fatal terrain. And so they talked about 9 different terrains that you could possibly do battle on. and on how to do battle on these different terrains, what to do with the horses, how to do all this and survive. And then there was one terrain, do not take horses here, you will all die. And then know yourself, what are your strengths and weaknesses, and then it gets part of just, again, being observant to what your horses are, how you're using them. Just because someone else is doing something, that doesn't mean you can do it too. I have lots of references on putting this together. I did a lot of research because we do get a lot of, again, this is very controversial. So I wanted to make sure I was, coming up with the right stuff to talk about. Anytime I make statements, I want to be able to back them up. This Hampson study was pretty interesting. The horses of Assateague Island and some of the other things that I looked at. There was just a lot of information out there. Here's my Taz horse, played polo till he was 23. I'm sorry, 30, and shot all his life. And thank you for listening. And I'll have any questions that you want. Thank you.
Well, thank you again for your time. Of course, this is, as usual, really informative and wonderful. I do have a couple of questions that came in kind of around the same topic, generally about, it's pretty easy to notice when, you've changed your horse's work. You'll notice that, to reevaluate and, reanalyze your horse through that acronym there. The horse's breed obviously is never going to change. There's certain things that are fairly obvious. Where would you best recommend a resource for if you're not really sure? Does this intensity, the intensity and the traction and things like that they're not really as familiar with? If you're an amateur getting into this kind of work and you want to be sure your horse gets the right care, is this something that your farrier, your vet, and your trainer would all weigh in on? Is this something? I know you do consulting work, but we certainly don't want to be calling you about everything every 5 minutes.
Well, I think your farrier and trainer should discuss stuff. Your farrier is not aware of exactly what this horse is doing all the time. But if you have a trainer that, has plans, if they're going to go to 3-day events or whatever you're doing, if you're working with a professional, then the farrier should be maybe, there should be some direction from the trainer, I think, on what the horse's needs are. How do we make this horse compete and perform the best he could be? And that should, and the rider should give some input. Yes, this really worked. My horse feels good. Or no, I didn't like the way we tried this and my horse doesn't feel as comfortable, or he's not as willing, or whatever it happens to be. So, communication is really important between everybody, and really listen to the horse. The horse is the one that we have to make happy. The horse is a judge of everything we do. So if the horse feels better and is competing better and more willing, then we're doing the right stuff. If something's not right and the horse is hesitant, then let's look at what we did and go back to the drawing board if necessary. But we have to have some idea of an analysis here to try and, again, we have to make the horse happy before we make anybody else happy.
And I have a question of my own. You shared with me this week that you have a book coming out in the next year or so, which I'm pretty excited about. We've seen you now for 3 different topics. Will this book encompass all 3 of these? Or
yes. We have right now. There's like 14 or 15 chapters, which the with protocol is 1 chapter. Confirmation is another chapter. We have chapters on 1 chapter on farriers, on what all these certifications mean, and things, all these different farrier organizations and how farriers become certified and what that really means. I have a chapter on foals. I have a chapter on horse behavior for shoeing, and how to deal with any of the problems. We have a chapter on hoof diseases, not getting very technical, but here's what the problem is, and here's some of the solutions, and here's what the possible outcomes, what we're looking for. And this is not a book for you to tell your farrier how to do things. It's a book so you can understand more about what's going on with shoeing and conformation and all the different things that interact. We have another chapter on really on why horses lose shoes and how to prevent that.
That's going to be great. I do have another question. Could you talk a little bit about the young dressage horse, and how do you know the subtle signs when the work has developed enough to kind of put them into or think about putting on shoes when they haven't before?
So interestingly, we take these young horses and, we're trying to bring them along. We work them on very favorable terrain. Hopefully they've got decent conformation because, we're buying a high quality horse and so on. And there we are, we're starting the horse, as a 3-year-old, we're getting on his back, and, getting him, getting his directions going. We're low intensity work at that point. We're in favorable rings. Maybe we're hacking the horse a little bit too. All that can be done if it's a decent footed horse without shoes very easily. Then maybe as we're hacking the horse a little bit more to get him out of the ring, maybe it's the ground is a little hard. We want to put front shoes on them because they bear more weight on the front. They tend to, we want to propel from behind, but bear weight on the front because that's where they're first going to be sore. And what I have seen with some of these young horses that are 3 and 4 years old, they really get moving on pretty good. They're becoming more forward. And everything is going good and with what we've been doing, and we hit a plateau, and all of a sudden, like, okay, the horse is in work, but that's it. It's like, is that all there is? And now it's time to help this horse engage his hind end. And again, with proper shoeing, not just any shoes, but giving that horse a little more support, a little more help behind. If he needs a little lateral support, certainly a little length so he can load his hind end better and use it more comfortably. And the next day, the horse is engaging his hind end and moving forward better. So there's your answer, at that point. So that's the indication. It's when we're asking the horse to collect more, it's time that we have to consider the hind shoes. And again, not just shoes, but the right shoes for that horse.
Thank you. I've got another couple questions if you have the time.
Got lots of time.
Excellent. You shared early in the I'm still reeling from the numbers over the number of farriers versus the number of horses in the United States, and also referenced, kind of a lack of accountable training for everyone.
Yes.
We have a question I think is going to come back to that. What drove the rise of the barefoot is best kind of movement, in your opinion?
I think it's come from a lot of directions. Number one, there's always been a shortage of farriers. So I went to a barefoot seminar years ago at Tufts University, one of the first really big ones. So what we call the barefoot movement came out there. And the reason why I went, as I work as a consultant for Mustad Hoof Care, which is the largest manufacturer of horseshoe nails in the world. And all of a sudden, this barefoot movement started gaining traction. And they wanted me to go to this seminar, but not to represent them, to actually go incognito and just don't put your Mustad shirt on, just walk around and talk to people and find out why they're there. So I said, all right, this will be fun. And there were horse owners there were veterinarians there were farriers there were people who were just trimming there. So a lot of the answers I got, like, why are you here, was things like, I want to learn how to trim my own horse's feet because I can't get anybody. Or I've had my horses shod and we have a family, we have several horses, and I've never had all the horses shod where the shoes stayed on and the horses were usable at once. So maybe there's a better way. I want to try it. So I'm saying the farrier profession is failing these people. There's not enough farriers, there's not enough good farriers out there. So people are looking for an alternative. And that's the only, that was the big thing I walked away from. The other thing was this Dr. Strasser, who was a German veterinarian who was the key speaker at this, was very militantly anti-horseshoes. And she had some pretty wild assumptions and about horseshoeing, and felt all horseshoes do damage and horses aren't born with horseshoes, therefore they shouldn't have them. And really, basically was completely against farriery. But I found out that she's from Germany, and because of the way the Germans view women working in the trades, women were denied to be farriers and blacksmiths in Germany. So, but women might want to be able to take care of horses' feet. So a certain amount of this comes from their denial to be allowed to work in this field. And so they want to come up with an alternative method. But a lot of the barefoot movement also comes with people who are very holistic, which I have nothing qualms about. I don't disagree. They think they can change the feet to be better with diet, and in some cases maybe they can. And so there is certain modalities, looking at the whole horse, not just the feet, where you can take a horse that doesn't have the right diet and doesn't have the right things going on, and maybe build a better foot on that horse over time if you're patient enough. And then you can get possibly a better foot to go barefoot. But you're still denying the traction. You're still denying the need for support on some horses. Case in point is, I had a client years ago. Some people just want to be natural. I think I spoke a little bit about that. And this horse I was just trimming regularly for this nice woman, developed a crack in the horse's foot. And, it kept on getting worse and worse and worse. And the horse became lame and had an abscess. And I said, the only way to deal with this is to put a shoe on to hold this foot together properly. And finally, she let me do that. And, and of course, we were able to rehab that foot with a shoe on. And then as the foot grew out and the crack grew away and the horse was sound again, she had me pull the shoes. And guess what? The same crack developed again. And we went through the whole thing again. And this horse needed a shoe to keep this foot in better shape, mainly because the horse had a defect in its coffin bone. And so this woman was trying to feed this horse all kinds of different supplements. And even actually, she believed in holding crystals against the foot. And none of that actually helped the horse. Only the horseshoe that I put on helped that horse's foot. So some people just want to believe that the natural type is going to fix everything. But it doesn't sometimes. So these are the different things that drive the barefoot movement.
That's fascinating. Thank you. We had a couple of questions about real particular situations, but a couple touch on horses who've transitioned out of intensive disciplines. So retired polo ponies or horses that have, as they age are doing less intense work, but are used to the shoes. And, when they turn on the jets are doing very, very proper and upper level movements, but just because of their age and, the person who's riding them now aren't being worked as much. Do you have any thoughts on that kind of a scenario?
I think a lot of this boils down to the individual basis on horses. There are certainly horses that could transition for lower intensity work. But if the horse has been used to the support and protection that the shoes provide, and the horse does not transition well, then I think the horse is going to be more comfortable keeping the shoes on. And that thoroughbred mare that I used in my first with protocol slide is retired now, and I cannot keep her comfortable unless I keep her shod. So she is not being ridden now anymore, but she still wears shoes because she's sore without them. She's had them all her life, and maybe that's a crutch, but I could never have used her the way I've used her because she's, again, thin-soled, thin-walled, beats her feet up during fly season. So, she has to wear shoes till she's not doing, till she's gone. And then that's just her. And so each one's different. This Taz horse here, when I stopped playing him, I pulled his shoes off and retired him. I euthanized him at 34. And he didn't wear shoes for the last 4 years of his life. He was just out in the pasture, get trimmed regularly. So every case is different.
Thank you.
And he's a thoroughbred.
I have one more question, and I know there are actually more in here, but they're a little more specific. And I'm going to recommend, if you haven't been here for a session with Steve before, he is over at Cornell and does do consults. So if you have specific questions, please do reach out to him directly. He's really great. We have a number of members who've gotten your opinion on their horses, I know. One of the last general question I'd like to end with, though, so we can all eventually get ready to shovel tomorrow. What are the downsides of boots, in your opinion? Just a little dive a little deeper into the boots.
Good question. The downsides of boots, and I'm not against boots. The problem with boots are, number one, you can't leave them on all the time. And because if they don't fit well, you can get rubs and cause coronary band problems and other irritations. And if a horse needs that kind of help, if he's sore-footed, he cannot wear the boots all the time. And in wet weather, the boots might retain moisture, which then starts creating fungal and bacteria problems, even thrush. So you can't let them fill up with mud, or if it's been a rainy summer, holding all that moisture in can be a problem. However, if you have a good-footed horse and you want to go hacking this horse down some, hard trails, and you just want to go on a pleasure ride, and you don't want your horse to be sore, you put some boots on and you go on your ride, and then you take them off, and all good. So the boots serve a purpose. I have a good friend, a veterinarian, who does distance endurance racing, and she's capable of trimming her own horse's feet and taking care of them. She understands feet really well. And one year she said to me, I want to just try the boots and see how I can do it, and see how it works for what I'm doing. I said, sure, I have nothing against that. And so about 2 to 3 weeks into working this horse, she calls me up and says, I'm bringing him in to be shod because I'm just sick and tired of having to pull these boots on and off. I just want to ride my horse. So there you go. It takes a few minutes to do all this stuff. And if you're not used to picking up feet and getting these boots put on, and then you got to take them off when you're done and so on, and wash them out and all that. So it's added work. There's no doubt about that. So as my mother would always say, before I was married, every pot has a cover. So I hope that answers that and leaves things on a happy note.
It did. Thank you. Go ahead, Iris.
Thank you so much, Steve. I have to tell you, my dad used the same saying, but he added, some just rattle a little more than others. But you have left us on the absolute right note in that all of these things take work that somebody has to do. And you have given us so much being back here tonight again, and through what you do for the sport and the industry and for NEDA. So really, thank you. And I also want to take this opportunity to give a shout out to Dawn and her committee, who have really jumped back in the fray and helped to get this organized again, but it wouldn't work if all of you weren't here with us. So really, thank you, everybody. Thanks for the enthusiastic response, for letting us know that you want to be back here, and for showing up. This is great. So as a reminder, Dawn is going to send out a quick survey to get your feedback. Let us know what you think and what you'd like to hear in the future. And we will be back here next Thursday at 7:30. Steve, Dawn, everybody here, thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to, do this for you guys. And all I'm trying to do is just make you think about this stuff, and just open your mind up and just be more knowledgeable as horse owners. That's my intent. That's not trying to push anything.
Well, I have
but
to tell you, I was at one of the shows volunteering this last summer, and I had a member not even introduce themselves first, just march right up to me and say, you know, I'm just walking around here looking at the geometry of all these hind ends. I can't get that presentation out of my head. So that's you're doing a successful job at that for sure.
that's great. That's great. Happy to hear that.
Very fair.
Super.
All right.
Super. Well, you guys do well. And if anything else I can help you with, just let me know.
Great.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
Steve. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
All right. Thanks.